Hey everybody, I made a version of this video last night, but I realized that it wasn't um, totally completely audio. You could still see shadows because I had forgot to flip the camera around or to cover it. Whoops. Um, that might be visually annoying for people who are looking at the screen like, what is going on? Also, I have my window open because it's warm in here, but I can kind of hear a lot of the cars passing by. I find it kind of nice and calming, but it might be too much for you, so we'll see how that goes, I guess. Yeah, and I had a lot of thoughts and feelings on this that I really felt like I needed to process. Um, Usually the first time I talk about something is a little bit messy, um, as it comes through, I guess. As I turn it into like symbols and impressions, um, into words, I guess. Um, I don't know. I'm articulate and I'm not at the same time. It's frustrating. But I wanted to talk about all of this confusion I've seen around FE versus FI. Like, there doesn't seem to be the same level of confusion over NE versus NI, though I would argue that there is some, and even less so over TI versus TE, probably because T is a much more objective function. I personally believe objectivity is an illusion, but that's another can of worms for another time. So I've noticed this confusion arising, especially with regards to me figuring out my type and me figuring out other people's types, and other people figuring out my type and other people figuring out other people's types. And I don't know, call it weak TI, but noticed that I've noticed that there seems to be contradictory ideas over what FE or FI looks like in practice. Because I think people who are enthusiastic about the cognitive functions can understand that, FE is concerned with the external emotional reality of a group, and FI is concerned with the internal. Now, I think when people think of FE being concerned with the external, that automatically means that it doesn't include itself. And I think it can look that way for certain kinds of people, but for others, it doesn't have to. And I guess on the same side of that coin, it doesn't mean FI is never interested in other people either. I think it really raises the question of what function, and I'm not talking about what cognitive function, but what purpose is your feeling function, there we go, serving you, serving others by extension. So I actually wrote a few notes this time so I can help myself keep some focus, but and not have the stupid brain emptying thing. It's like one of the worst symptoms of my mental illness. I hate it. Yeah, so I've heard there's this dichotomy, this contradictory dichotomy, that FE isn't concerned with its identity, yet it needs the validation. I've been told personally, talking about myself means that I'm using FI, but because I'm looking for external validation so much, I must be an FI user because I'm valuing my part in a group. And on the flip side of that coin, that FI doesn't care what people think and doesn't need to share an emotion, but somehow it's obsessed with how others see them because it cares about its identity. You can see how these ideas floating around can lead to some type confusion for all feelers, especially NFs, who are more apt to kind of pick this system apart. Maybe you're wondering where I stand on these issues, but I have to say that as someone who, I've taken cognitive function tests many times, so not just like the 16 personalities type of like, are you an E or an I, letter dichotomy kind of quizzes, but just just the tests that test your cognitive functions individually and how apt you are to use them. I've always tested highest, ironically, NI just over FE. Maybe once or twice FE, like a percentage or two over NI. It's always like extremely close. But I do tend to score very high in FI as well, and NE to an extent. And I mean, there's self-report bias in that too, right? But it's something to consider. I think I try to be honest with myself. I don't know how successful that is, but the effort is clearly there. And that raises the question for me, though, like, if I'm using FE and FI both so strongly, like, how do I determine which one I'm using? And I guess an easier way or a more technical way to make that call is to look at it and say, well, I score high on both of these feeling functions, but a little significantly higher on this intuitive, or if you're a sensor, like this sensing function. So I must sit on this axis, and for me, that's FE and I. Or NIFE, who fucking knows? But that was one clue. But another clue is kind of stepping away from the model of like, what do you use the most? Because I think that people who face a lot of chronic stress, especially early in life, may dissociate and rely on functions that aren't their preferences, but that meet a survival need or meet an end goal. I can certainly attest to that. One, I want to say that the lovely Pakoki is going to be interviewing me tonight, and I'm super stoked. Maybe people who watch that tonight will come back and see this. If so, hi. But I think I want to get into the topic of, or topics of, mental illness, but particularly structural dissociation and personality cognition. Cognition, personality. So I won't get into it too much here right now, because you should totally watch that video when it comes out, or if it already is out by the time you're listening to this. Because I will say that trauma, early life trauma, does fracture the personality and can cause more than one personality, whether that's in the form of a full alter, leaving you with amnesia, or just like an intense personality switch, a la Jekyll and Hyde, when certain triggers provoke that response. And it's not a healthy response, so it's not going to be finessed and natural to use those functions in the same way, but you know. And Megan Lavoda also said herself that it's difficult to type really healthy people on the other end of that spectrum because they are going to be more well-rounded and have like worked on their weaker points. For me, I think that's true for any NFJ who has been in therapy for a really, really long time and seen the objective value of sharing one's feelings is probably going to gravitate towards that. I think without the therapy that I went through, I would be framing a lot of my personal feelings and mistaking them for being more objective, which is something that ENFJs and ESFJs in particular can fall prey to. I think I'm less confident about that being an ESFJ thing, although like they are also FE DOMs, so I would consider that probably there's some ring of truth to that for them too. So yeah, structural dissociation can really impact that. I also just vehemently deny, I am not on board with the idea that ENFJs always look put together. I think that's always a goal or a desire, because we want to be effective, and in order to be effective, we know we have to come across that way. We feel the most clear-headed when we're behaving in such a manner, but going to be successful because FE deals with external social expectations to a large extent, and the external expectations are set by neurotypical people on the basis that neurotypicality is the norm. So if your brain functions far, far outside of the norm, just outside of an MBTI framework, okay, then it's going to be harder for you to meet that standard. And that is a particular type of pain for EFJs, because EFJ cares so fucking much. If okay, I'm gonna dial this back for a sec. So I've seen discussion around whether or not mental illness, or I want to broaden it to include neurodiversity, because you can have mental differences that don't necessarily manifest as illness or suffering inherently. They can cause you difficulty based on the fact that society is hard to navigate when you're like that, but removed from social barriers, it might not be a source of suffering for you. Autism is like that for a lot of people. A lot of my suffering as an autistic person has less to do with just the innate state of being autistic, but more just of how people treat me, the expectations I'm expected to fill, etc., etc. What was I saying though? Oh, that was a loud guy. Sorry. Right. So this idea that you can have any mental illness or whatever and still be any type. But I notice this for ADHD in particular. People objectively agree to that notion, but in practice, anytime anyone shows any signs of ADHD, like impulsivity or inattention, they automatically get branded with an FP label. Very rarely this can happen to NTs as well. I have an ENTP ex-boyfriend who definitely had undiagnosed ADHD. But my brother also got diagnosed with ADHD. We both are. But he is an SFP, probably ESFP. And so that works out in his favor in terms of not causing type confusion, and just based on the fact that his inattention and impulsivity are ultimately kind of serving his functions in a way, rather than being a source of conflict. But for me, my distractibility and my impulses less so, because I feel like my impulses are a bit more aligned with NI, like, or FE, even just like the urge to say things out of turn. But I don't think I'm super physically impulsive, and I don't think I ever really was. But regardless, the inattention and distractibility A lot of that has to do with my sensory environment, but that's like weaker SE, I guess. And maybe even trickster SI. I don't know. But as well um, as just straight up cognitive dysfunction. Like my brain is farting often. Um, it's not that I'm having another idea and I'm excited to go chase it like a butterfly. I mean, that does happen sometimes. I'm not going to act like it never does, because that would be lying. Um, and compounded with cognitive dysfunction, it can definitely appear aggressive when it does occur. But like, you know, at the end of the day, I feel dysfunctional when this is happening to me, and I experience it as something that is happening to me rather than necessarily me in a flow state. Eric Thor brings up flow state a lot, and I think thinking about where you feel at flow is important for determining type, because if you have stress-based dissociative tendencies and you dissociate often, then you're going to be acting in ways that aren't not natural, but like not healthy for you often. And I think that can also mistype. Like any experience that's led anyone to not know how to be a fucking person, it's not going to make them not their own personality type, but it's going to make it hard to tell. Both externally and internally, I think. Unless they have a more quote unquote chaotic personality type innately, that tends to give a lot of space for those experiences. But if you experience, oh, I have 2 people tuning in. This is cool. Hi. If you have, sorry if I missed, oh, 1. Wah, wah. Hello still. Peace, love, weed, Thompson. Hee hee, hi. Hello. I was just saying that if you experience, ha ha ha, it okay. Hey, oh, INT Jerk, nice to see you again. I was just saying that, you know, if you have really intense trauma, especially early childhood trauma, your personality is going to fracture, and that's going to be chaotic regardless of whether you're an INFP, you're an ENTJ, like it doesn't fucking matter. So if you're going to have that kind of internal chaos, that can lead people who don't have a trauma-informed MBTI framework to mistype you, and maybe for you to mistype yourself, because you're going to be labeled or label yourself with type titles that just are innately a little more chaotic. I can see this happen with my husband, the childhood trauma thing. Yes, it makes it really hard. Like, I'll get a bit into the, oh, a third person. Oh, this is so exciting. Yay. I'll get in a bit into the FEFI thing, in particular again, because I think I was veering off topic a bit. But the reason I was kind of getting into trauma is just, yeah, the idea that ENFJs must have their shit together in order to be real ENFJs. I think that's more stereotypical than examining how the functions work in order. Stereotypes, archetypes, types in general have patterns, but they aren't the be-all and end-all to dissecting how a person is going to appear in the world. He is ESTP and I am ENFJ. Oh, thanks for joining, fellow ENFJ. My channel name is a play on the stereotypes. Yeah, I kind of got that, INT Jerk. I did date an INT jerk. Smiley face, hi. I did date an INT jerk of my own, but I also had a roommate who was an INTJ, and he was an angel, and I love him so much. So I think Whether or not you're a jerk has a lot more to do with whether or not you're willing to work on yourself and your weaknesses. Um, for NTs, that can be a little bit harder because the self-help discourse isn't necessarily tailored to the way you think, but also just NT traits a lot more than NF and SF to an extent. So you might not be encouraged to work on your weak points as much in the same ways, I guess. I'm exploring my FI, so I can't wait to hear you talk about versus FE. Yeah, let's dive in a little bit. I don't know if you were tuned in earlier, but I was kind of going over just the conflict over what they actually are. FE isn't concerned with identity, yet it needs validation, and FI doesn't care what people think, but it's obsessed with how others see them. And you can kind of see how for both those are contradictory contradictory arguments. And ooh, hi Sybil, love you. Ooh, I'm interested to know more about how NTs are less likely to follow self-help ideas at some point. Yeah, I think that's a good topic for a later video. I'm kind of interested to see what will unfold. I was the first comment. I'll fight. Yes, my #1 fan. I'm interested to see what discussions will occur with Pakoki tonight. So I wanted to make sure I had that interview before I got into too many other things. Oh wait, top chat, not live chat. Weird. Oh, hi. Yeah, just to avoid redundancy and to see what kind of doors get open to even more conversation. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had gotten to this point yet. I think I was making my way there. But this idea that FE only talks about other people and FI only talks about themselves. I think this is kind of true for maybe people who are more neurotypical, don't experience psyche fracturing due to a lot of trauma. In my neurodivergent friends, I find that this is a much less reliable meter of typing for a couple of reasons. I have an INFP friend that I really adore talking to. I can definitely tell they're an FI user, but they're still interested in making change. They're part of a student union. They're actually part of a social student group for students who deal with mental illness and neurodivergence. Anyone who's ever been labeled crazy basically is what that group is for. And you would think that's a very NFJ type of thing to do or to be concerned with, but not necessarily. So this friend does spend a lot of time thinking about how other people exist in the world and caring about it. But I think that comes from a desire to respect differences rather than an innate need to bring people together based on how they are unified, how they harmonize, how they experience similarities. That does come up to an extent because I don't think, because feeling is so complex, and isn't objective the way logic is, I don't think that you're going to find the same level of objective separation like you would with TI and TE, or the same variance in energetic signature as you would with NI or SI versus NE or SE. Yeah, some people say that intuition is the hardest to nail, but personally I disagree just based on the fact that there are so many wildly misleading statements out there about what FE and FI actually even are. So for me, I was saying earlier that I use a lot of FI. I mean, I'm going to be using more because this is an ENFJ channel and I'm an ENFJ, therefore I'm going to be talking about personal experiences. I think folks like Megan Lavoda are more comfortable with MBTI in general and having typed people in their environments, so feel more confident giving advice from a more objective value standpoint. And I'm hoping that I'll get to that sort of place. But MBTI is shaking up my worldview a little bit. So my TI, or what I think is my TI, really wants that accuracy. I think NI does too, because it wants to see all. Before I even consider making content that looks like that. So for now, I can at least be assured that I'm an expert on my own experience. So I will use FI more in my own videos. But I mean, that can lead to confusion. Oh, she's talking about herself. She's such an FI user. That's a really limited understanding because it doesn't even consider what the goal of using a function is. Like, I think that okay, I'll try and pull in an example. I'm talking a lot of theory right now and a lot of discourse, TM, but I was at a party. It was actually an INFJ specific party. I was still welcome to come. There were a couple of people. There were people there that didn't identify as INFJs. There was one censor there that like fully was like, I think MBTI is silly and irrelevant, basically. And we were all like, interesting time to voice that opinion, but okay. That's valid, I guess. Sure. That was wild. But then there were also people that were probably mistyped. But that's another conversation. And I was talking all night, basically, to this really cool dude who was an ENFP. And you know, I think the ADHD stereotypes and just our refusal to acknowledge neuroatypicality, like neurodivergence at all, made even me internalize the bias of looking for those stereotyped kind of ADHD, bouncing from topic to topic, super distractible, being like, la la la, in this person's behavior, and I didn't see it. So I was kind of questioning, like, okay, is this guy really an ENFP? He admitted that he wasn't an expert at this point, so I don't know. But the more I talked to him, the more I could see, well, I picked up quickly that he did prefer FI. He seemed a lot more comfortable with living and let living. And that's something I have a really hard time of letting go into, even though objectively I recognize its value. And I admire that in people a lot, even though it's kind of scary. For me at least, not necessarily for everybody, but I could see that, I could tell we were both using intuition, but he almost seemed kind of skeptical of my omniscient, or what I experience as like a more omniscient perspective, and often would kind of bring up a challenging question, not meant to provoke or anything, but just like to better understand. And I realized that I was like, oh, this is like really healthy NE. And we often mistake distractibility for NE. Fuck. Yeah, so that was kind of a recent example of me even checking my own biases, because, you know, I have them too. And we were talking, and I was kind of explaining to him, like, not only have I been pushed to use FI and examine my own emotional biases that come from within, that I may have previously attributed to external emotional realities, but also I confessed, like, you know, I was talking to another ENFJ friend and an ISFJ friend about this, where we will sometimes, when feeling compelled to give advice, frame that advice from a subjective personal experience. And it's not that we're making that experience up, but we know that we have learned that telling people what is best for them isn't always welcome. And, you know, honestly, that's fair. It frustrates me, but fair. And if we present a piece of advice, well, so I tried this, I don't know how you feel about it, but this is what worked for me. Like, do what you want, though. We don't necessarily mean that. And this is where the whole FE is fake comes from, because we're tactical, I think. But, you know, we don't necessarily mean wholeheartedly that we don't care whether you take or leave this advice, because we feel strongly about the advice, but we're going to position it like we do, just so that that person is more apt to take the advice. I don't think I always spoke this way with regards to advice in particular, but it's definitely a very useful, I feel like tactic sounds really evil, but I mean, a very useful strategy in helping people get to where at least I feel like they need to go, and or where they've expressed that they need to go. Also, I've been like looking up and to the left a lot when I'm speaking, so if anyone has put any messages in the live chat that I may have missed, I'm sorry. I'm gonna like quickly check now. Live chat. Oh, no, okay, I'm up to date. Nice. I guess I will kind of make my final point at this point. Wow, I can't believe I've been live for half an hour already, but just I've been thinking lately a lot. If non-neurotypicals can't be ENFJs for all the reasons that I've stated, then the system isn't value neutral and is therefore dishonest because it presents itself as such, and is therefore, on that basis, flawed. So we need to start thinking about appearances versus reality. We need to start thinking about our own normative biases about what functions look like in practice, especially even cultural biases too. Eye contact is important in North America in particular, especially to like North American white settler people. What is your Enneagram? Guess. I've said it before, but if you don't remember or you haven't heard, I'm curious to see what you think it is, and then I'll tell you. What was I saying? Fuck. Oh, right. Yeah, we value eye contact. And if that's not a universally valued behavior to show that you're interested in what another person is saying. So you might read someone from a different culture who's like not invested in making eye contact, or someone of a different neurotype like myself who's not making it as much or all the time, as displaying FI instead of FE. When that's just not either a valued behavior to display caring about another person, or it's just not how the person is. 4-wing-5, correct, on the money. I'm curious to hear why you think that, but you're not obligated to go into it either. Yeah, like for me, if I'm making eye contact with you, I'm not just being polite. Like, that is a deep intimacy thing for me, and or a deep attraction thing. And I may not feel like that level of connection is appropriate for the situation. And someone who maybe is from a culture where eye contact is limited and specific might feel the same way. I'm 5-wing-4, and you gotta admit that we're pretty similar. I guess, but I notice you've only tuned into my videos that are more NI heavy, so There you go. I mean, yeah, I dated a few INTJs for a reason, I guess. But um I also think that I perform more strongly when I have an audience. So I guess that's extroversion, extroverted feeling. Ah, I probably ramble a lot more when I'm alone, but or when I think I'm alone. But yeah, just at the end of the day, like, please be aware of your own biases over what you think a certain behavior means. Be aware of what you think an objective behavior, an objective function, what purpose it's serving, and be aware of the fact that someone may not even have a fully integrated personality to begin with, because that is common in what even just the diagnostic rates of that run around 1 to 2%. I tune in when I can. I'm just teasing, don't worry. I appreciate it so much. I appreciate every time even one person engages with my content. I'm like so overwhelmed with gratitude and like happiness. So yay. Yeah, I'd be interested to talk more, INT Jerk, about this stuff. So the two people that are still here, feel free to tune in to my interview tonight on Pikoki's channel. Today's Monday, I believe, so it'll be 7 p.m. EST for both of us. So hopefully it'll be really long, I imagine. I'm a big talker. I think I have a feeling that our FE will pair well together, so it'll probably be a long conversation. And usually the viewership varies from like 20 to 30 people per stream, so there'll be a lot more like engagement and probe for discussion too. So I'm really excited. But thanks, folks. For those of you that tuned in, I'm going to try to do daytime streams more often and not just my jagged 3 a.m. thoughts. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Oh, I will tune into that interview for sure. Awesome. Yeah, I've seen you there a couple of times. I'm excited. Yeah. So, cool. I'm very stoked and hope to see people who can tune in be there. Bye for now. Bye.